Hello and welcome to Alan History Nerd. This is my latest video looking at the rise of Macedon. In particular today we are going to be looking at Philip's court and the expansion of Macedon into the surrounding areas, and also looking at some of its expansion into Greece, in particular in relation to the Sacred War. This is to help students studying A-level ancient history. Just a little more detail from the spec. The growth in Macedon, Macedonian power, and the role of Philip in that process. We're looking at Philip's court and patronage, the expansion of Macedon, organising and securing and expanding Macedonia. So again, as I say, this is specifically aimed at A-level ancient history. I'm going to try and work in bits from the prescribed sources just to ensure you've got those kind of micro quotes that you can use in the exam. Philip's court and patronage. So the dynasty that Philip and Alexander belonged to, according to Herodotus, had ruled Macedon since the beginning of history. The Macedonian model of monarchy was unusual in Greece and perhaps copied some practices from Persia. Particularly interesting fact, given that later on Alexander is going to be highly criticised by the Roman sources for adopting Persian ways. There is no real other model of monarchy like Macedon in the rest of Greece, so perhaps there's something in this. Philip created a new layer of aristocracy by having the sons of aristocrats educated at court. He distributed land and military offices amongst this aristocratic group, and this built a group around the king known as his companions. These became a social, political and military elite. And again, as we keep on studying Macedon, these companions, particularly when attached to the word cavalry, are going to be massively important militarily. Obviously, a really good way of maintaining control of this aristocratic group is having their sons at court, which is a wonderful way of ensuring their best behaviour, and is a model or idea that we see copied in European monarchies later on. Diodorus tells us that Philip distributed conquered land of the Methone amongst this group, and that's in 16.34.5. So we've got this idea of a kind of structure that there is, and patronage is a really important part of it. But we also get some fairly negative views of Philip and his court. Obviously, we're going to get a very negative view from Demosthenes, who is like the key critic, is our only proper contemporary source that we look at in any detail. And so is very important to us, but we always have to treat what he says with a little bit of care, as he was an Athenian orator who essentially sees Philip and Macedon as an existential threat and wants Athens to get back on its feet. So he describes the men around Philip as robbers and toadies with looser morals than the average mountebank, which is a common trickster or charlatan, and describes them getting drunk and performing lewd dances and singing lewd songs. One of them he names as Callias the hangman. So we get this terrible view of what's going on in Philip's court if we listen to Demosthenes and the ideas that he was spreading when speaking against Philip to the assembly in Athens. We also hear that Philip extended patronage at court to non-Macedonians. So in Diodorus 16.52, he tells us of exiles from Persia, Artabazus, a satrap who had rebelled, and Memnon, a Greek who'd led Artabazus' army. Some really important stuff in that in terms of showing the kind of the mixture of people at Philip's court, that it wasn't just Macedonians. Also an interesting one when we're doing aims and comparing aims of Alexander and Philip later on, and this idea of, well, did Philip have his eye on Persia right from the beginning? Is this the reason why he has these kind of key Persian exiles in his court? Justin in 8.6, as he often does, stresses the immorality of Philip. In telling a story of Philip's court, he states that Philip was pretending violent love for his brother-in-law Alexander to manipulate him and seize his father's throne. The court of Philip, a controversial place, generally considered probably to be quite an interesting one, given the interesting mix of people that are there, and again, it's hard to how much we can read into it from the sources, but this idea of this kind of manipulative but very clever Philip. One of the main things that we associate with Philip and his court is drinking, and there's lots of stories of Philip being drunk, and we see the kind of continuation of the behaviour of the Macedonian court with Alexander as he travels around conquering Persia, and alcohol seems to play a fairly major role in Macedonian life. Now, one of the bits that reflects this is the famous story of Philip the Sober, which turned into a kind of saying in English. So, so Philip of Macedon is, according to Roman historian Valerius Maximus, was approached by a noblewoman seeking a ruling on some apparent slight or legal matter that she felt she got the worse of. Unfortunately for her, when she went to speak to Philip, he was drunk. He dismissed her case without hearing it out fully, saying that he just belittled her, wasn't interested. Disappointed, the woman said she would appeal to the king's judgment. Obviously, Philip very angrily reacts to this. Who was the king if it wasn't him? And she simply explained that she was going to appeal directly to Philip the Sober, rather than, as she was implying, the judgment of Philip the Drunk. Legend has it that she subsequently won her case and the king's pardon, and was happily vindicated for her action. And the tale gave rise to the expression, found its way more widespread use in English in the 1500s, and since then, though albeit very rarely, in an attempt to have someone to reconsider a snap or ill-advised judgment at a later date. So again, it's a slight aside or anecdote really, but it gives us a bit of insight into what Philip's court was like, and it also a bit about the character of Philip, where there seems to be multiple different sides to him, where he can be calm and rational and wise and just, and he can also be the complete opposite, and alcohol may well play a role in that sometimes. In the north, Philip took control of Amphipolis, Pydna and Crenides, which had gold mines and therefore was particularly important, and Portida. He also laid siege to Methone, which was the last Athenian possession in this part of northern Greece. This siege lasted about a year, and is really important in the history of Philip of Macedon, because that's the one where he loses his eye, and is often referred to as Philip the One-Eyed. And as you'll see, if you watch the Alexander film, which is portrayed by Val Kilmer, you'll see again portrayed with his missing eye, famously missing eye. The Third Sacred War offered Philip opportunities to expand his influence in Greece. The Phoenicians had cultivated sacred land near Delphi. The Amphiotic League, a religious organisation, imposed a fine on them. They refused to pay. The fine was too large, too big. The Phoenicians claimed they didn't have enough money. So, to make sure they had lots of money, they seized Delphi itself and took its wealth. Thessaly and Thebes and the rest of the League went to war with them over this. Initially not directly involved, Philip saw this as an opportunity, and it's kind of the key story in explaining the downfall of Thebes, really. So, following the period we look at in the first year of the course, where we look at the Peloponnesian Wars, and we see Sparta and Athens as the great powers. In the kind of the bit in between that course and the Macedon that we do in the second year, we see Thebes emerging as the great power, and then it declines and Macedonia rises up, and the Third Sacred Wars is kind of key in that, as it kind of wears Thebes' power away. Justin, in 8.1, describes Philip as looking as from a watchtower for an opportunity to attack their liberties and fomenting their contentions by assisting the weaker, obliged victors and vanquished alike to submit to his royal yoke. Again, Justin not always a great fan of the morals, at least, of Philip, and again sees him as this kind of opportunist, taking advantage of whatever he can, a kind of an untrustworthy but clever, manipulative character. So Philip is going to try and take advantage of what's going on in the Third Sacred War, and he gets the chance too, because the Thessalians and Thebes ask him for help. Thessaly was suffering a revolt by the Ferrari, who were supported by the Phoenicians. The Phoenician leader Amomachos inflicted 2 defeats on Philip, and Philip and his army retreated into Macedonia over the winter. It is unusual for us to hear of Macedonian defeat, and obviously we much want the improvements Philip had made to his army, and this kind of shows how strong at the time the Phoenicians must have been, again with this enormous amount of money they had available to them after pilfering it all from Delphi. Philip then returned to Thessaly and defeated the Phoenicians. The Phoenicians were defeated at the famous battle of Crocus Field. This is described in Diodorus 16.35. And then again, according to Diodorus, having won the battle, Philip hanged Amomachus. The rest he threw into the sea as temple robbers. Though later on elsewhere he says in 16.16 that he had Amomachus crucified after he'd been cut to pieces in the battle. So, I mean, it's quite common to find sources conflicting with each other. Slightly less normal to find a source conflicting with itself. Diodorus in 16.38 describes Philip as restoring its freedom to the city of Pherae and settling other matters in Thessaly. So, Diodorus, at least, is seeing Philip as doing a good job here for the people in Thessaly. Obviously, the other sources contrast with this. So the more negative view we get from Justin 8.2, when talking of the Thebans and Thessalians, calling on Philip for help as voluntarily submitting to that power from a foreigner, which they dreaded in the hands of their own countrymen. So again, it's immediate implication here that they're giving Philip too much power. However, Justin does report the glory that victory brought to Philip. This affair brought incredibly great glory to Philip in the opinion of all people, going as far to say they believed he was worthy to be ranked next to the gods. So the Sacred War, incredibly important business in Greece. Delphi, probably the most one of the most sacred places in Greece. So the man who can vanquish the Phoenicians who've committed these terrible sacrilege is going to be held up as a hero in Greece. This really is something that Philip is looking for. And we can see, no matter what the view of the sources on Philip individually, that both of them are showing his great success here. Whether they kind of like him or not, they still tell us the story of his successes in sorting out the Third Sacred War. So Philip was consistently looking to expand Macedonia's territory and thus kind of secure its border. He took in 356. He took control of Crenides with the gold mines. 349 expansionist policy focused on the Chalcidic Peninsula, which is always the bit that for my students always remember as the bit at the top of northern Greece, which is kind of the three-pronged bit sticking down, which is important in, for example, the story of the Mardonius' expedition and that lovely bit from Herodotus where they get eaten by sea monsters. So this kind of three-pronged peninsula is a really important bit of northern Greece, and there are these kind of key cities on it. Now, particularly on the peninsula is Olynthus, which had earlier swapped allegiance to Athens. Philip was appointed Archon of Thessaly, gaining its revenues and control of its army. So this is due to the events in the Third Sacred War. And then in 352 he set out against the Phoenicians. Athens, however, is fearful of his intentions, and they might think, well, he's not just going to defeat the Phoenicians. He will then come through Thermopylae, and he will be bent on conquering the whole of Greece, including Athens itself. Philip laid siege to Olynthus and took the city. They sent embassies to Athens asking for help, but the Athenian troops arrived too late. The city fell, according to Diodorus, due to Philip bribing men within the city. Even Diodorus, the most sympathetic of the ancient sources to Philip, says of him that by his evil communications he corrupted the morals of the people. That's 16.54. It's a lovely little quote, that one. So again, if you want to show in your AO3 that Diodorus isn't just a kind of a positive source for Philip, that's a lovely example of it. And this idea of the manipulative opportunist that Philip clearly was. Demosthenes, the Athenian orator, again, remember, he strongly dislikes Philip. It says, there is absolutely no one who has ever had dealings with him who is not who he has not deluded, and by deceiving and winning over one after another those who in the blindness did not realize what he was, that he has risen as he has done. So again, Demosthenes' explanation of Philip's rise and power and the increasing power that him and Macedon have is about this kind of underhand deception, corruption, and again, that's very much the picture that Demosthenes consistently displays of Philip and as a person and Philip's court. Justin in 8.3 reports that two sons of Philip's stepmother were in the city, and tells us he destroyed an ancient and noble city, consigning his brothers to death, delighting himself at the same time with a vast quantity of booty and the gratification of his fratricidal inclinations. So again, not a very nice side of Philip there, where we can see his victory, but again a real kind of negative about his moral character. So in 346, 345, see the ongoing fighting with the Phoenicians, who now had support of Athens and Sparta, which again, so sacrilege can only turn people against you for so long when there's another big threat like Macedonia coming. And they're fighting against the Thessalians and Thebes, and remember they're now aligned with Macedon. Diodorus describes Philip's army as passing through Thermopylae and intimidating the Phoenicians and ending the Sacred War. And we see praise here in Diodorus in 16.59. The king, having without battle unexpectedly terminated the Sacred War, because essentially when he passes through Thermopylae at the head of his army, the rest of the Greek states realise at this point they are in no position to fight against him. And so what will be ready therefore is to move into the next kind of series of events when he ends up taking a greater and greater control of Greece, ending up eventually as hegemon of Greece and preparing his armies to invade Persia. Right. So thank you very much for watching. I hope that's been helpful and informative for you. I'm going to endeavour to add more videos to this list, going through this playlist, going through Philip and then on to Alexander. Again, hopefully useful for people who are studying ancient history and preparing for exams, but also of interest to anybody who is just interested in the fascinating world of ancient Greece. Thank you very much for watching.